After 20 years of serving as a sniper in the Navy SEAL teams, Jack Carr wrote The Terminal List, which was turned into the #1 series on Prime Video. The book series now has 7 books, with this year's Red Sky Morning making Carr's 4th appearance on the #1 spot of the New York Times bestselling list. He is also the host of the Danger Close podcast and the Jack Carr Book Club. My dad and I recently had the opportunity to talk to him about his upcoming book, Targeted Beirut. Targeted Beirut, which is Carr's first nonfiction book, tells the story of the 1983 Marine Corps barracks bombing and the untold origin story of America's war on terror. Carr wrote this book with James Scott, the Pulitzer Prize finalist for Target Tokyo, and the author of The War Below, The Attack on the Liberty, Rampage, and Black Snow. My dad and I got to talk to him about the Beirut attack, which is the Marine Corps' greatest single-day loss of life since Iwo Jima. We also talked to him about his time in the SEAL teams, the importance of faith in God and war, the influence of modern technology and social media, his TV shows, and more. I hope you enjoy our discussion.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. So I'm Tim White. My son Abraham, he's the one that he's the mastermind behind getting us this interview with you. So we're excited to be able to talk to you today. Well, we enjoyed reading the book. Really excited to be able to read that pre-release copy and very powerful story about the Marines in Beirut and so sad, the loss of life, but I think a lot of people don't realize how far back the war on terror really goes. And I was telling Abraham that that's really kind of how the Navy started. Initially, we were the Continental Navy, and then disbanded after that. And then because of the Barbary pirates, that's really what instigated getting a national Navy again. So.
Yeah, now you're a professor somewhere? Is that what I understand?
I am an instructor for the Navy Center for Security Forces. I teach unit commanders about terrorists and terrorism and the anti-terrorism program.
Oh, fantastic.
I was active duty before that.
Okay, what'd you do active duty?
I was a helicopter pilot and a flight instructor and was the CO of a couple of reserve centers. Actually, I was a CO of the reserve center in Chattanooga when it got attacked by a terrorist.
Oh, geez.
So that was kind of my introduction into being able to meet the instructors and the Center for Security Force folks, and kind of how I got this job.
Okay.
But
wow. What platform did you fly?
I flew the 60 Sierra.
The 60. Okay, nice. Wow, that's very cool. Awesome. And Abraham, what's your story?
I just was listening to a lot of military books, and I found your books, and I've really enjoyed them, and I've read a lot more because of them. And
Nice.
I'm just a huge fan.
Oh, man, I love that.
Well, we had some questions for you. Actually, Abraham was telling me that you were serving in Guam when 9/11 happened. I was at the Naval Academy when 9/11 happened in my last year, and just wanted to know what was it like for you there in Guam, serving, I guess, as a SEAL there, and how did that change your life?
Yeah, it was about midnight in Guam. It was my second deployment, about 2 weeks into it. And phones started ringing up and down the hallways, and people were banging on the doors and all that. We didn't have TVs in our room, so we woke everybody up and went down to the basement where we had a big screen TV. And then we watched the news like everybody else and watched the Twin Towers fall on TV. And we thought we were going to be going to Afghanistan like the next day. Like we thought we were going in on September 12th, and it wasn't quite like that. It was, if you remember back, there was a lot of disorganization. It was just disorganized and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of prep. No one really knew what was going on or what we were going to do or what our exact response would be. And I ended up going and doing some executive protection for what was then called SINCPAC Fleet, so Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet. I think they changed it a few years later, so there could only be one Commander-in-Chief, but it really just means Commander Pacific Forces. And he was flying to shore up support from some of our allies. So I did executive protection for him in the Philippines, a couple other places. And then by the time we got back to Guam, all our stuff was palletized, ready to go, and loaded it on the C-17. And we still thought we were going to get into Afghanistan, but ended up going to Kuwait and took over the shipboarding operations, which at the time, before September, like September 10th, that's what you wanted to be doing, was shipboarding operations in the Gulf, because it was kind of the only game in town. September 11th, then that's not what you wanted to be doing. You wanted to be getting into Afghanistan. So we took over for Team 3, who was doing the shipboarding operations, and those were to enforce the UN oil embargo against Iraq. So they would send tankers, class 3 tankers, other things as well. Class 3 tankers are the big ones. And so out of Iraq, and then they would take a hard left for Iran. So we had, I forget exactly how much time, but I want to say maybe like a half hour or so while they were in international waters. And that's during that time we had to board them, take them over, and turn them back in international waters or away from Iranian waters, and then turn them over to a prize crew that really knew what they were doing and could drive the ship essentially. So it was interesting because they always left in the worst weather at night. And so and then they'd cut all the ladders all over the ship. So once you got on, you still had to hook and climb and get up to different areas to try to gain access. And they'd welded the doors and windows and all of that. So you had to use a exothermic torch and a quickie saw to try to get access, and clocks ticking down as you're getting closer to Iran. And they put barbed wire all over the decks, like kind of put like Christmas lights almost, like all over the place, so that if you tried to do the fast rope out of the helos, the rope would get fouled. So you fast rope. So it was interesting. I mean, they were adapting to our tactics, and so we in turn had to adapt to theirs. But it was interesting because it's the only time in my 20 years in the Navy that I was on ships, and it was interesting adapting to that kind of an environment. But I got back from that and then got into Afghanistan not too long after that.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it was good. Like, looking back, the timing was pretty good looking back on things.
Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, you too. You guys too. Yeah.
Privilege.
I was wondering what led you to choose Beirut as the subject for your first nonfiction book.
Yeah, so I always knew I would do something nonfiction. As you know, I weave a lot of history into the books as it is, into the thrillers, and talk about history as much as I can on social media, try to capture some of the lessons, and at the very least, try to do my part to make sure we don't forget some of these things. So I always knew I would do something in the nonfiction space. And then as I thought I built up enough political capital with Simon & Schuster to be able to pitch the next idea, then I did. And in the lead up to that, I wrote down about 3 pages worth of different terrorist events, probably from end of World War II, let's say, up to today. Unfortunately, there's a lot to choose from. And I kept going back to Beirut 1983 because it was such a pivotal moment. For a little bit there, I was thinking about 1979 Iranian hostage crisis, but so many books have been written on that. And then I looked at books that have been written about Beirut 1983, in particular, the headquarters and barracks bombing, the Marine Corps element there. And there wasn't really the one book that you could point to and say, like, if someone asked me, hey, what should I read on this event? There wasn't the one that just jumps to mind that you can say, oh, you have to read this book. There's been a couple written, 2, possibly 3, they're on the shelves back there. But they're written a long time ago through a singular person's perspective. And so there wasn't that seminal work yet, is the point. And so I pitched Simon & Schuster on it, said, I want to do this series. I want to start with this. And they said, let's do it. And I said, I want to work with a historian, though, make sure I do this right and do all the legal stuff, annotating everything correctly and just making sure it's done right. And they said, who do you want to work with? And I said, well, this guy, James Scott, I love his work. I didn't know anything about him. That's the other part. I didn't know anything about this guy. All I knew is his work. He had 5 other books, 4 on World War II, 1 on the USS Liberty. And so they said, well, who's his agent? And I had the books right there. And I was looking at, let me look in the acknowledgments, see who he thanks. And I was looking either in the author's note or the acknowledgments. And I said, well, he's thanking someone named John Glessman. And my editor, Emily Bessler Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, Atria, she's like, that's my husband. He's an editor at another company. And I was like, oh, fantastic. So they linked us up and we jumped on a call and hit it off. And now we're dear friends. But it was amazing to work with him because he really knows what he's doing. A respected historian, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and just a great guy. So, but Beirut, I kept coming back to it. Out of all those events that I was looking at that I wrote down, and I remember as a kid, had the Newsweek and the Time magazine were on our kitchen table when this event happened. And I already knew that I was going to go in the military. I was always focused on that since I was very young. And I knew somehow that the wars of the future, that mine would involve terrorism, especially because I was focused on special operations. So anything I could find on special operations, I was reading. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. So back then, of course, you could find the end of the internet when it came to searching for things. It was called the library, and you'd go there and you'd get to this is the last book that I can possibly find on special operations. And okay, so you found the end of the internet there. But I was always reading. So anything current events like that would come across. I remember the Falklands War. I remember every day looking at the newspapers that we got at our house and looking for pictures of what was going on there. I distinctly remember 1979 Iranian hostage crisis, and I remember being in school. I was in a Catholic school at the time, and they took us to church so we could pray for everyone that was involved, and that stands out in my head. I remember those photos. I remember watching Walter Cronkite. So we had my family was readers, and you couldn't watch news 24/7 back then, but it was 6 o'clock that news would come on. So, which I actually like a little better looking back. It's that you had time for these certain things, and then there was time to do other things. So it wasn't going 24/7. But those magazines that I have in the other room actually now, they stood out to me and really impacted me. I just kept coming back to Beirut 1983, and it was a natural place to start as well because it's such a turning point in our relationship with the Middle East, and it's really the basis and the model for everything that's transpired since through the lens of Iran and its proxy forces. So there was really no question when I took a breath and thought about it. There really was no question. It's time to start this series with Beirut 1983.
Yeah. And it's so timely too, right? That what's going on with Israel and Palestine and Hezbollah, and I had no idea that Hezbollah had their beginnings in Lebanon and with this attack here.
Yeah, pretty much. The group that would become what we know as Hezbollah today was the group responsible for this attack. It has the seeds were planted earlier, of course, and watered along the way. But this was one of their first big attacks, and it was the model for they call them spectacular attacks. I don't like that term, but that's the term that's used for a spectacular terrorist attack that's going to garner essentially the world media, capture the headlines, and they've thought out ahead of time, typically, what the end result of that will be. So they've worked back. So the end result, we want, let's say, the U.S. to leave country X. How do we do that? Now we'll plan the mission, which is a little different than what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan over the years. Was we would say, okay, we want to remove someone from the board. Okay, let's go take that person out. Let's do here's the target package. We're waiting for this trigger, whether it's a human source or corroborated by some technical intelligence or something. So we know that at 3 a.m. he's going to be in this building or this house or whatever it's going to be. We're going to go grab him, bring him back to base, turn him over for questioning, and then go out and do it again. But we didn't really think through, like the enemy does, what's the impact? What impact are we just trying to dismantle this organization like a mafia family or something along those lines? What's the end result that we're looking for? And we weren't very good at that at any level over the last 20 years. The enemy's very good at that. So we essentially worked at the opposite way that, let's say, a Hezbollah or Al Qaeda or somebody will typically do when they're planning a quote unquote spectacular type event. But it is interesting how Hezbollah is the ruling party of Lebanon, and there's so many parallels today. And Israel just yesterday or Sunday, a few days ago, went in and they planned and executed an amazing attack in Syria to hit a precision missile factory. I think they hit a bunch of different targets. Their reporting isn't quite clear on exactly what they hit, but it looks like multiple targets, special operations missions, because over the years they've tried bombing this facility and they couldn't get down below, so they could continue building these precision guided munitions there. And so they went in with special operations forces. They bombed it a little bit, softened it up, moved in with special operations forces out of the helos, dropped these guys off to go down, destroy it from the inside, get as much intel as they possibly could. But what was interesting about this one is that they also used drones essentially as a blocking force. So instead of having a big, and this is just very accounts that are just in open source and not corroborated anywhere. So it's like the initial reporting. And they use these drones essentially as a blocking force. So instead of having, let's say, a company of rangers like we would do blocking the outside while, let's say, a special operations unit goes in and does what they need to do, like inside a target area, they use drones for that. And I haven't seen or heard of that before. So that was pretty interesting to read about just the other day. More information on that is being made public. But it's a Hezbollah precision guided munition factory in Syria. So essentially an Iranian precision guided munitions factory in Syria. And they also hit a Russian listening post. Russia has a bunch of different kind of listening posts throughout Syria. And I think they hit one of those as well. And they grabbed 2 to 4 Iranian scientists. There's been conflicting reports of how many, but they grabbed 2. They got 2, at least 2 people that they can bring back to question or maybe trade for something. So it was an incredible operation. But point being, this is the same Hezbollah that was involved in Beirut 1983.
Yeah, wow, that is amazing. And so tragic, the loss of life there in Beirut. Was it 273 killed?
It's 241 U.S. service members, and then they hit 50. They hit a French paratrooper compound as well with 58 killed there. So,
and so tragic. Also to think about how the Marines, it seems like initially they had a mission and then they were just there and didn't really have a mission. Nobody really knew what they were doing. They didn't know what they were doing and had very unclear rules of engagement that kind of set them up for failure. And it's sad to read about the gate guards and the guys manning the fence line didn't even have magazines in their rifles. And I think Colonel Garrity was kind of blamed for that a little bit, right? He took the fall for that. But from the accounts in the book, it seemed like he was an amazing leader. And I was just so sad to see him get that letter of non-punitive letter of caution or instruction, and then be relieved of command when he got home. And just wanted to know, what was it like talking with him and spending time with him, and how did that affect him being relieved?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I got to spend some time with him, have dinner with him, and his family, and I also got to be with him at the 40th anniversary commemoration event. So this huge VFW hall full of people that he served with, their families as well, and the amount of respect that they still have for him was evident. It was clear in that room. It was palpable. So that really stood out to me. The respect that he still has from these guys, and then also he knew he was going to get blamed for this as soon as it happened. Like, this is the military. It's gonna, no matter what happens under your command, you're responsible, whether you have anything to do with it or not. And he was very aware of this. And he was probably someone who was going to be commandant of the Marine Corps at some point. He was that well regarded of an officer. But this, of course, derails that. But the other lesson is that he got up and kept moving forward. He got up and moved on into the world of intelligence and did a bunch of other things. But he didn't sit there and at least, from my perspective and what I know, he didn't sit there and kind of just sit and whine about anything. He got up and he kept moving forward, just like a Marine should. Boom. And that really stood out to me as well. I mean, you're at this guy and you're handed essentially an impossible mission and put in a tactically disadvantageous position, just like our guys were in Afghanistan in August of 2021. A lot of similarities. So he's given an impossible mission, put in a tactically disadvantageous position. This happens. He for sure takes the blame. He knows that that's how it's going to go down. And that's the military, and gets up and keeps moving forward. And so there's a lesson there, I think, for everybody. But there are so many parallels. And the difference, though, between Beirut 1983 and August of 2021 in Afghanistan is that someone was held accountable, whether it was the right person or not. Colonel Garrity, no one held accountable for Afghanistan, and in that case, well, really, very few people have been held accountable from the end of World War II up to today when it comes to the military and performance. But What also is strikingly similar, so we put these groups tactically disadvantageous positions. You have loss of life, Abbey Gate, of course, we have 13. We have multiple wounded, to say nothing of the people that are dealing with the emotional trauma of that event for the rest of their lives. But same thing in both events. People stood up and ran to the sound of the guns to save as many of their brothers in arms as they could. In Beirut, you have these guys digging through the rubble with their hands, with K-bar knives, maybe a shovel or a crowbar if they can find one. But they ran to the sound of the guns. They didn't know if there was another truck bomb coming. So they're setting security. They're dealing with that. They're trying to save as many people as they can. They're digging through that rubble. They're on the clock. And same thing in Afghanistan. When that bomb went off, people ran to the sound of those guns to save as many people as they possibly could, U.S. service members and innocent civilians as well. So the American service member is the same. It's that same person that's fighting for that man or woman to the right or left, and something happens and they're running to the sound of those guns. So it's interesting the parallels at all the different levels between something that happened very recently and then obviously something that happened over 40 years ago.
It seems like many lessons could have been learned, but they aren't because people aren't reading about them, or because of a short-term memory that may be affected by major headlines all the time, or social media, or just not caring. Do you see a short-term memory affecting the country and our ability to learn from our mistakes?
Great question. And certainly a lot of it has to do with these things that we carry around, that are meant to distract us and keep us from really doing any deep thinking, keep us addicted. And on the other side of that, just as an author of thrillers, that's what you're competing with now. Because back when I grew up, you had to wait till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night for your show to come on, whatever you're going to watch back in the 80s. And so you're waiting for Magnum or Miami Vice or Riptide or the A Team or Knight Rider, whatever you're going to watch. But you had to wait. If you want to watch a movie, you go to a new movie coming out, you had to wait for your parents to take you on Friday or Saturday night. And you didn't have every single television show and movie available on every single TV or device anytime that you wanted. Atari 2600, Abraham, I'm not even sure if you know what that is, but it's an early video game system, and you could only play that thing for like a half hour because the graphics we thought they were great at the time, but you just couldn't spend days and days playing like you can now. Of course, there's no social media to distract you or to keep you from doing any deep thinking. That in many cases is set up to divide because it makes money for social media companies and influences whoever, and the beneficiaries are those social media companies and maybe political group, organization, whatever it might be. So that's a huge distraction, even just on the thriller side. Now, when it comes to something like nonfiction or an event or doing any deep thinking or drawing lessons or anything along those lines, that's even more difficult. That's an even tougher competition today. So certainly, I think that there is essentially a dumbing down of the American culture, and you really have to recognize that and decide not to be influenced by these things whose sole purpose is to influence you. And you have to realize that a lot of these devices and platforms are not just there to influence you, but manipulate you and control actions and even thoughts. So I think the first step is recognizing that and then taking steps to counter it, which means putting the devices away, not letting these things manipulate you, and diving into the pages of history so that you can take these lessons and apply them going forward as wisdom. And we are not very good at that in this country at all, at any level. But for me as an author, it was the thing. This is the least I can do is I can try to capture these lessons, put them in a book like this, and also humanize the event because well before social media or anything like that, when you see a newspaper headline and says 241 servicemen killed, that's a big number. But you don't know any of them, and you don't know really many of those stories. You might see a rubble in the background of a newscaster who's out there holding a microphone that's reporting on what happened. You might see a photo or two in Time or Newsweek. Um, but then it's gone, and you're on to the next thing. So what I really wanted to do was tell some of these stories. I wanted to capture the lessons, the tactical, operational, and strategic lessons, but I also wanted to humanize the event so people can read this and learn about Dr. John Hudson and who he was and how his family now had an empty seat at that dinner table forever because of this event. And the reason for that is because of a decision that's made up in the executive level at the White House, and then it filters all the way down and now has multi generational effects on John Hudson's son, his wife. So I wanted to capture those lessons, the people that stood up in the wake of this, the people that didn't make it, the people that were buried in the rubble. I wanted to tell their story, and essentially I wanted to get out of the way of the stories and have it be, it's definitely not my book. It's not my story. It's theirs. That was very, very important to me to humanize the event while at the same time capturing these different lessons. So that was the goal from the outset, and in the hopes that we can take some of these lessons and not have to relearn them in blood.
I thought one very powerful story that you included, I think, was in the epilogue of John Hudson's son when he was at I think a Cub Scout event, and just was mourning his loss of not having a father, never knowing the sound of his father's voice other than the tapes that he sent. It's just really a powerful story.
Yeah, that one's tough. Just thinking about it gets me emotional. So it was an emotional book to write. The thrillers are also the thrillers. I didn't really realize that at the beginning, but when I was writing that for the first book and doing that outline and the executive summary and all that stuff, didn't really hit me till I started actually turning that outline into the narrative, and then it became very clear that even the thrillers were going to be very emotional writing experiences because I was going to weave in so many feelings and emotions from real world events into the pages of thrillers. But now in this, I mean, you are it's real. It's not made up. I mean, the books and the thrillers, yeah, the feelings and emotions are real, but in this, you're telling multiple people's stories, and so many of them are heartbreaking. So that one in particular about the Cub Scouts and the asking someone to be like, oh my goodness, it still gets me to this day. But so many families have had to deal with that over the decades, and my grandfather was killed in World War II, so my dad grew up with that empty seat at the table. So it's and that once again that yeah, those are decisions again made at very senior levels, and uh, hopefully we can avoid a lot of these things in the future if we take these lessons from the past. But um, hopefully that's not just wishful thinking.
Yeah, I agree. Be God's mercy if we learn from our mistakes.
Religion and war are sometimes they're extreme opposites, but the unique importance of faith during war has always intrigued me. And there's a common adage that there are no atheists in foxholes. I thought it was especially neat to read about the chaplains and the incredibly important role they played. What impressions did you get from speaking to the survivors and the chaplains and hearing about their experiences?
Yeah, those ones were extremely powerful. Yeah, three chaplains, and one of them buried in the rubble, who's having this essentially a conversation with God as he can't move, he can't see anything. He's getting slowly feels like he's being slowly crushed. He's thinking about the Louis L'Amour novels that he read about miners trapped in cave-ins and how those guys got out and kept fighting in these novels by Louis L'Amour. In conversations that he had with God while he was in there. That was so powerful. And A rabbi and another chaplain that are some of the first responders to this thing, and they're administering last rites while they're trying to rescue as many people as possible. And yeah, there's so much of that, and the Don Howell story where he's so Danny Wheeler was the chaplain that was on the fourth deck that rides it down, trapped in the rubble. He's the last person pulled alive from the rubble. Um, and then you have Don Howell who goes, sleeping in the basement, and the whole thing comes down on top of him. And he says the Lord's Prayer, closes his eyes, opens them, and there's a tiny shaft of light, and he ends up clawing his way out. So yeah, the kind of the influence of religion on these guys, and not even just on that day, but leading up to it, when you have people getting killed throughout that summer. This is one of the things I didn't really realize. Even someone who, I mean, I think I'm fairly tuned into different terrorist events that have happened over the years, and of course I knew about the April embassy bombing and who we lost there, and then of course I knew about the October barracks and headquarters bombing, but I wasn't really clear on what had happened between April and October, and how we have guys getting killed by a sniper, by mortars, and these guys were in combat, no doubt about it. Between April and October, these guys are in combat. Um, and the administration, of course, wants to just talk about them being peacekeepers. And when someone is killed, they have to talk about, well, was it really direct fire or was this indirect fire type of a thing? And then in the aftermath of this event, also, and I know I'm straying from the religion question, is that they kind of felt abandoned by the Marine Corps, because it wasn't the raising of a flag on Iwo Jima. It wasn't a glorious day in Marine Corps history. And so I think they recognized that they were kind of, and there were very many of them. It wasn't like this was something that impacted a generation like World War II, or even in Vietnam, on the home front and over in Vietnam. This was a small number of people who were deployed to Beirut during this time period, and they kind of felt like they were forgotten about by the Marine Corps in its aftermath. So I think that affected a lot of these guys. But yeah, the religion aspect certainly stood out to me all through that summer, that spring and summer, and then of course on the day, and then afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see how they'd also feel abandoned since there was no response to the attack. So no retaliation because of
Yeah.
the attack.
Yeah, that's an interesting part too, in that there was no real response by the U.S., even though we talked a very tough game, and by me I mean the administration. We talked a very tough game in the aftermath of this attack, and then we leave Beirut and Lebanon very quietly in early 1984. So that teaches the enemy something. It taught Iran that proxies work, and they've been using proxies very effectively ever since.
I think our time is up. So do we need to let you go?
You can, or you can, Abraham. You can ask about terminal list show stuff too if you want to try to get anything out of me. I don't know if I'll give it up though.
Okay. How long were you there for filming, and what was it like to bring an original story to life on screen?
Yeah, so it was great because there's a lot of opportunity there, because now someone can't say, well, this changed from the book, this changed from the book, this changed from the book, because it's not a book. So that kind of that takes that off the table. So being an original story, though, it has some links to, let's say, some parts of True Believer. I will say, I'd say it sets up True Believer. But yeah, it was really interesting to be able to do that. So using characters that introducing a couple new ones, but also giving some backstory to some of the other characters in there. But once again, stuff that's not in a book really. So you have a lot more freedom, which is pretty cool. And we also have the same team from the Terminal List, so now we know each other even better, and there's a lot more trust built up between us and the executive levels at, let's say, Amazon, because they saw the numbers from the first show, and so there are a lot less questions this time around as to what we're doing. So that's pretty cool. You feel like you have a lot more freedom this time around because the first one works. You've got proven track record now, so that's it's pretty cool. And yeah, when it was in Budapest twice for this, and it was really cool to be able to film there. Beautiful city, and of course in the outskirts as well. So it's pretty cool, and I've seen most of the episodes so far, and they're pretty dang good. I could not be more fired up for this season. I think it's gonna be good.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I got to be careful what I say, because I don't want to, I know I'm going to see it later somewhere else, so somewhere online. So I got to be careful. But as we get closer to things, I'll be sure to stay in touch as we get closer to some other maybe events or news dropping.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Y'all had to make some changes for True Believer. Was it kind of hard to know what you're going to do next, because it kind of sets up some other things, but with recent world events in Ukraine, it doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. So you have when you're talking about True Believer that we're working on right now. Haven't started filming yet, just working on the the scripts and everything. Um, that's it. Yeah, I mean, Russia actually did invade Ukraine, so we can't have that be the thing that kind of gets thwarted in the book. But we're trying to keep as close to the book as possible. I would say even more so than season one, and but now you have changes from season one that now impact True Believer, even if you're trying to stay close to that. And then there's all sorts of other things that need to change because of, I guess you'd say, filming timeframes and things. There's all sorts of things that come into play in filming that I was not aware of. Like sometimes you just don't get a location and you can't do it. So you got to morph and you got to switch some things. Sometimes a world event, like in this case, happens and you got to write something new around that. So I would say that there's an effort to stay even more true to the book, knowing that all these other factors that were outside of our control change the story just because of what's happened in the world since I wrote True Believer. That's a pretty good intel right there. Breaking news.
You're a husband and a father too, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You talked about some of the struggles with society and how social media is. There are lots of problems. I guess there's some good that comes out of it, right? We are able to build connection with people that we would otherwise be unable to develop those connections, and can be helpful as an author to get the word out. But it's something that's concerning as a father and also having children. How is that? How do you try to balance the access to media and modern technology with controlling those things with your children and encouraging them to have more intellect and try to be more wise and not swayed by the things of the culture?
I'll tell you, it's tough. It is. I'm in the same boat as every other parent out there trying to navigate this new world, one that we don't really understand even. I mean, it's tough for me to even post on Instagram and X. Like that's about as much as I can do and as much as I understand. Um, but it's tough. We're in that same boat, and they're gonna have to navigate this way. I mean, there are so many great things like what we're doing right now. Is really really cool and a direct result of technological advances. But I would say overall, I would say that there's more of a negative to social media and these technological advances than there are positives. I would say. But that's just who knows. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. But I would say that just looking at it, trying to look at it objectively, and I would much rather have my kids running around outside than being on their devices. But that's why I try to get away every year. Try to do a river trip where you're down in a river canyon in a raft where there's no Wi-Fi, no cell service. So you're kind of forced to put those things away. And me too. Me too. I don't want their memory of me to be that I'm on my device all the time. So I try to leave the phone like upstairs. So if I want to check it, I have to come up here to do that. But yeah, trying to limit that stuff is extremely difficult. And I'm just trying to do the best I can, or my wife and I are trying to do the best we can, just like everybody else.
Well, keep up the good fight.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thanks for taking time to talk to us today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation, and thanks for the questions. And Abraham, thanks for all your support.
I want to thank Jack Carr for taking time out of his insanely busy schedule to talk to us. I also want to thank Simon & Schuster for letting us read Targeted earlier and for setting this interview up. I've wanted to interview him for a long time, so it meant a lot that I was able to do it now and that I was able to do it with my dad. As we talked about in the interview, it is vital that we learn lessons from history so we don't have to learn them again in blood. There are so many lessons that can be learned from Beirut. Carr and Scott lay them out so thoughtfully in Targeted Beirut. Targeted will be published September 24th in hardcover, ebook, and audio. I highly encourage you to pre-order this book right now and share it with a friend. I have a few of James Scott's books behind me right here, but you can find the rest, find his social media, and more on his website, jamesmscott.com. Jack Carr can be found on social media at JackCarrUSA and his website, officialjackcarr.com. Please let us know if you enjoyed the interview, if we should talk about anything else, or if we should do another interview sometime soon. If you'd like to keep up with our family, you can subscribe or visit our website, timandfernicia.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of our discussion.